Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to the fourth workshop in our series looking at the creation of the Peace Corps, specifically Sergeant Shriver's role in really creating this program that has now been sustainable for more than 50 years and has engaged over 200,000 Peace Corps volunteers that we figured out early on provided more than 1 billion hours of service since the time the Peace Corps was started, which is just so amazing. So we've loved having so many of you join us over the past few weeks, and we've especially been excited to have our speakers, who I'll introduce in a moment. Today we're really thrilled to have John Bowman here, and he's the head of the Sergeant Shriver National Center for Poverty Law. And we also have Venu Gupta, who is the head of development for the Sergeant Shriver Center. And so we're thrilled that they're with us. And then we also have Debbie Chisler, who's been joining us, and she's on the board of the Sergeant Shriver Center. And I always want to point out Nicole Bittler, who has been the intern on this project and has really made this all happen. So we're thrilled today to have Jamie Price, the executive director of the Sergeant Shriver Peace Institute, who's been the driving force behind this curriculum and leading all of these workshops, and then Bill Josephson, who, besides being a wonderful alumnus of the University of Chicago, was also the general counsel for the Peace Corps and had played a huge role in the actual development, as well as all of the components that led to this program being so sustainable and existing in its current form for the past 51 years. And then finally, we're thrilled today to have our special guest, Kirby Jones. And Kirby is an RPCV, as they call them, a returned Peace Corps volunteer from the 1960s, and specifically in 1965, he was in the Dominican Republic, and a number of fascinating challenges came his way and conflicts, and so he's here to really kind of tell us what that looked like on the ground and to offer insight kind of based on his experience there that we hope will be useful for all of you here. So I'm going to turn it over to my trusted friends and speakers here, and thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks a lot, Dylan. Thanks very much. It is great to be back. I'm very happy that Kirby was willing and able to fly in. He came in from Phoenix last night to do this. And Bill was just saying that we're going to miss all of you next week. Well, it'll be Thanksgiving. When we'll miss you, and we're thankful for the fact that we've been able to do this. This fourth session is where Shriver's method and the Peace Corps gets real. We want to talk about how it works in the field. You'll remember that in the first session we talked about Sarge's method, and basically he raised the question, if you're going to build peace, if you want to make peace in the world, and that doesn't just mean cessation of conflict, he means a positive notion of peace, which is to have people get along, have people understand each other, have people work collaboratively together. How do you do that? And he said, money isn't going to do it, guns aren't going to do it, simple goodwill isn't going to do it, but what will do it is a combination of compassion and service. That's what he believed were the drivers for the kind of change he wanted to see. And then in the second session, we talked about how this was formulated into the policies and procedures of the Peace Corps, and how compassion and service were translated into a series of practices that Sarge called simple rules. You learn the language of the people you're working with, you anchor yourself in the customs, you take on the standard of living, and you go to offer yourself to find out, to be curious, to find out what they need and how you can help, and you commit yourself to working with them for human dignity and welfare. So that was the idea. And then last time, particularly Bill, led us in a discussion of how that became a political reality. And particularly the politics of keeping the Peace Corps independent and not part of an extension of the U.S. Foreign Service apparatus, and how hard Sarge worked for that. And I think you have a paper that was passed out. Bill, do you want to?
Well, I hope that, I hope that you have this little document. It's one page, and you'll recall that I described how Sarge and Bill Moyers in particular spent day after day on the Hill working every single congressman and senator they could find. This is a page dated September 6, 1961, which just shows his schedule on the Hill for that day. And you can see that it's not exactly easy. Just absolutely, you might describe it as political packed. One of the things that's most interesting to me about the schedule is that he gets invited to have lunch with Allen Ellender. Allen Ellender was then an extremely southern senator from Louisiana. But people need to remember something that perhaps they've forgotten, that although the Southern Democrats were racist, and certainly Ellender was no exception, they also had a number of liberal strains. They were free traders, for example, as opposed to the Northern Democrats who basically believed in high tariffs. And they had an extraordinary respect for service. Now, of course, most of them would have said that that meant military service, but when the Peace Corps began, it was extraordinary to me to see how many of these conservative Southerners reacted positively to the Peace Corps as the beginnings, conceivably, of a national service program. Amazing. And Allen was very, very intelligent, extremely intelligent, and a great supporter of the Peace Corps, believe it or not.
And it did become a reality. It was already on the ground in Tanganyika and Ghana before the president signed the legislation. But Kirby Jones is a man who was on the ground early on. And what we want to, we're going to do a format roughly like we did last time. I will ask more questions than anything else. My statements are probably pretty much done now. And our two texts are Kirby, who was in the Dominican Republic in the Peace Corps, and then Bill, who was in the Peace Corps office. And the focus that we've chosen for this case study is to really try to put the idea of the Peace Corps to a test of, can it really work? How can it really work? And so we'll talk about what Kirby did and what he experienced, and that'll unfold for you. But as you see, the title is The Peace Corps and the War Corps. In 1965, as many of you know, a revolution broke out in Santo Domingo and in the Dominican Republic, and Kirby was there, and the Peace Corps volunteers were there. And so you have a direct contrast between what the Peace Corps was doing and what the U.S. Foreign policy and military was doing, and to be able to talk about those and to hold them up in comparison to see, well, what does make us more secure? What does produce peace, and to test out this method? So you have a map of Santo Domingo, which we'll look at, and also a timeline, which has a couple of typos in them. One of them serious, and I don't know how this happened. In 1963, you see that it says JFK was assassinated on 1111. It's actually 1122. As I don't know what my fingers were doing when they typed that. There's another name down the way that I will point out.
Wasini.
Yeah, it's Wasini is the general who led the junta troops, the loyalist government troops.
Well, I would describe the counter-revolutionary troops.
Yeah, I think that's better. The counter-revolutionary.
Certainly not the loyalist troops.
Loyalists to the junta, yeah. But the counter-revolutionary troops, Wasini, you can see it's mentioned in the third bullet at the bottom of the page. It's actually, his name has both of them, Wasini, both of them have two S's, and I think on the next page, the double S's were dropped virtually entirely by my fingers. So I want to correct that. But Kirby, as you can see in just to set a little bit of context, the longtime military ruler and dictator of the Dominican Republic was assassinated in May 30th of 1961, just months before Peace Corps was started. The Peace Corps was then invited into the Dominican Republic. In 62, Juan Bosch was elected president late in 62 and took office in February. And during this time, Kirby was thinking about the Peace Corps.
Correct.
What? So tell us what back then. What drew you to it, and how did you get involved?
I drank the Kennedy Kool-Aid. It was a very different political climate than exists now, in the sense that here was this new young president with whom a lot of us identified, doing something which no president had ever done. He was asking us to do something. And people like to be asked. And I felt tremendously motivated by, I'm going to go out and save the world, and this is what John Kennedy is all about, and sign me up. Where do I sign? Right? And there was an application process, and I applied. Hanging over a little bit sort of back was the specter of Vietnam. And while they weren't drafting like they were in 65, the handwriting was on the wall. So
How old were you, Kirby?
I was a senior in college, so I was 63, 22.
And where did you go to college?
University of North Carolina.
And that's where you were when you volunteered in Colorado?
Well, I went home and anxiously waited for the phone to ring to invite me to the dance, and it didn't come. And I called a friend of mine who was involved, and they said, "You'll hear in 2 weeks." And I wanted to go to Africa because it was the furthest away. And they said, "You're invited to the Dominican Republic, which is the closest practically." And I said, "Absolutely, yes, sign me up. I'm ready to go." But it was, and a lot of us, a lot of Kennedy motivation, a lot of political motivation, which you don't find now. There was a leader who we were ready to storm barricades with him and go anywhere and do anything, and he asked us. And we felt part of the Kennedy shtick. And in those days, they had training in Puerto Rico, Outward Bound. Sarge was a big believer in Outward Bound, which was based on presenting you with physical tasks that you had never done before on the assumption that you do the best you can. There's no passing or failing. You do the best you can, and you find out that you could do things which you never thought possible.
Did you repel off the cliff?
Yes, and the underwater swimming, and the hiking in the banana jungles, and the rappelling, and the digging malanga out of the water, all of it. And it's true, because you did do things that you never thought you would do before, and you were about to be faced with the biggest thing you had never done before, which was to parachute into the slums of a Latin American city, which, believe me, you had never done before. And then we finished training in L.A. at the Los Angeles State College and went on home leave. My parents lived in London. I thought, man, I would get a free trip to London, which I did. Didn't expect to. And then
that will solve it.
Then we spent a couple nights in New York, went to the airport, and we went from 7th Avenue in New York to Santa Monica to start the Peace Corps.
And we'll look at some pictures of where you went in a second. But two things happened on the way. One, and I just wondered how it affected what you were thinking about going to being in the Peace Corps and going to the Dominican Republic. One was that Juan Bosch was overthrown by the military junta, by Iwaseen, exiled to Puerto Rico, and then a month later, a little less, President Kennedy was assassinated. You were in training during both of these things?
Yeah, and the Bosch, it was a domestic political event that was too bad. But we had a job to do, irrespective of who was the head of the country. We didn't think that would sort of come back to haunt us, which it eventually did. And we moved on. The Kennedy assassination it made everybody pause. Why am I going overseas when this can happen in my own backyard? Why do I want to help people in San Domingo when, man, we need help here? But then we decided, as corny as it sounds, this is probably what Jack Kennedy would have wanted us to do. And nobody quit, nobody left, and we all went down.
So before we move you to showing us a map of Santo Domingo and the place you lived, any questions? And please, we forgot to mention, if you do have questions along the way, anytime, just raise, yeah.
Did President Kennedy's assassination affect the Peace Corps in a major way?
Not on my watch, not at my level. Bill?
I couldn't hear the question.
Oh, did President Kennedy's assassination affect the Peace Corps in any major way?
Well, I think emotionally it affected all of us terribly. I mean, the volunteers had this extraordinary identification with the president, and so did the staff, and so did the countries in which volunteers served. The ambassador to Guinea told me the following story about the consequences of the assassination. The embassy, of course, opened a book for people who wanted to come and express their condolences and sign the book. And embassies, as you may know, a terrible thing, but it's true, they usually close around 11 and don't reopen until 3. And the ambassador noticed that there was a man, a Ghanaian, standing in the sun. And he went out saying, well, you know, we're not going to reopen until 3. You don't have to stand here. Why don't you just go and come back at 3 o'clock? And the Ghanaian, as the ambassador related this story to me, said, no, I think I'll stand here. President Kennedy was my friend.
My answer to that would be, it's not as powerful as this one, but my answer would be that it affected the Peace Corps indirectly in the sense that President Johnson became president, and then 2 months later, December, January, he tapped Sergeant Shriver to run the war on poverty. And when...
Well, and we lost Bill Moyers.
Oh, right, and lost...
Moyers was in Dallas, actually, at the moment of the assassination. He had advanced that trip, and he went to the airport, and, got on the plane with Johnson, and never came back. So that was a key loss.
He was deputy director at the time.
He was deputy director at the time, and actually he kept that position even when he was on the White House staff for quite a long time, but never reappeared.
And then Sarge's time was divided.
Well, and I guess we should say that early in January of '65, after the president had been reelected, as I think I may have told you, Johnson called me over to the White House, handed me these 2 black books, said, this is the war against poverty. Your job is to go find Shriver and explain to him everything that's in the books and tell him he's going to be the director of the war against poverty.
That was '64, yeah. So it had a big impact. But didn't seem to, certainly the folks, the Peace Corps volunteers in Dominican Republic continued and went. We see the map. Kirby?
That is,
Talk us
back to
through
your question.
Well, I was just wondering, did your parents
sorry.
want you to? What did your parents think?
Oh,
Just
sorry.
briefly.
Graceland, I missed you.
They thought it was great. And the Peace Corps then was not like it is now in many ways. Once you left the U.S., you were not allowed to ever come back.
At
2
that
years.
time.
at that time. If you came back, you were terminating yourself from the Peace Corps. And that was for marriages and deaths and all sorts of other stuff.
And if you took a vacation, you had to take it in the region of service.
Right. No cell phones, no computers, no email, no nothing. None of the modern communications you have now. So when you went to the slums of San Domingo or you went to the rural farms of Ghana, you were a gazillion miles away. Anyway, we were sent down as the first urban community development project in the DR. Community development is sort of what you do with Bachelor of Arts generalists that don't know how to do anything. There were well drillers already there. There were cooperative specialists. There were forestry people. There were agricultural people. There were farmers. So a lot of these volunteers were involved in very specific projects. There were some English teachers. There were some nurses. Everybody had a job and a skill. Then there was us. And we had no skills. Which was part of the training. The training was, how do you community organize a community? What are the techniques? And Andy Hernandez, the first Peace Corps director there, had written a manual about it. The Peace Corps did, I'd say, a C+ training in what?
Where did you train?
In Los Angeles.
In Los
State
Angeles.
College.
And did you go into training speaking Spanish?
No, I spoke no Spanish going in, and when I arrived, I found out how quickly I didn't understand a single thing anybody was saying. It was instantaneous, and it took me about 5 months before I woke up one day and said, hey, I understand everything. My partner, Joe, spoke much better Spanish. But anyway, where am I looking? That is San Domingo. And we'll explain some of the spots, but go up to the north of the country and you see that V, La Caridad, and then Las Canitas up there, and there's a V right there. And see all that blank space over there? Go left, see more blank space. Tens of thousands of people lived in that blank space. I lived in that blank space just north of Las in Canitas is where we lived. How did I arrive there? The Peace Corps director put a map of San Domingo out on the table and said to me, where do you want to work? Well, I'd been in the country 12 hours. I didn't know where the hell I was going to work. He said, you can't work south of, he drew a line, you can't work south of there. So I literally closed my eyes, went like that. And he said, that's where you're going to work. And we did. And the idea was, when you inject into a relatively homogeneous community an outside element, and we were in spades an outside element. White America, young white Americans had never been in that area. When we traipsed in,
Let's see the picture of what the area is.
it was an event. And that's looking down one road from our house on a normal day. And you can go to the next slide, I think. That's on a rainy day, right outside our house. That stoop on the right is a stoop of our house, and that was a normal street. I think we got one more. And there's the sort of the same street on a drier day. The houses were wood. Think of it this way. Take your house, where your parents live, or where you've lived, take out all the sidewalks, take out all the landscaping, no trees, no grass, no stoop, no nothing. Your house is right on the street. Take off the top floor. Doesn't exist. You don't see two-story houses there at all. Go in the kitchen and take out the refrigerator, take out the stove, take out the microwave, take out the sink because you don't have any water, so you don't need a sink. You might have one light bulb in the living room. It's about all the electricity you have, a few hours a day. And oh, by the way, take out all the bathrooms. You're outside in a latrine. And put about 12 to 15 people, maybe 2 or 3 generations, in 2 bedrooms. And the bedrooms don't have doors, they have curtains. And that's where you're going to live. That's where they live. That is their life. Every day they have to find food. Every day they have to go get water, which becomes a big deal. We land, my partner and I, and we start by trying, and we walk into a little store and order a beer. And we start talking to Biembe, who was the head of that store, about what are you guys doing there? Well, John Kennedy's president of the United States, and his brother are Sergeant Shriver in the Peace Corps, and we're doing this and that, and his face just... One, we couldn't say it very well, and 2, it meant nothing to him. And we walked around for the first couple of weeks. We just walked around and made an appearance there, and we attracted kids. Young kids, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9. We were a curiosity. Give me money, dame un chile, give me a penny. How about a chiclet? All the phrases that people use with Americans, they used on us, and we gave them nothing. Very early, very consistently for 2 years. And they soon stopped asking. Then I'm making things very short. Now, what are we going to do with these kids? We have this built-in audience. Well, we go to the Peace Corps office, get some bats and balls and gloves, and we ask them one day, do you want to go out and play baseball? And they, sure, big sport down there. Juan Marichal and the Lou brothers and Julian Javier and more now. I mean, it's a factory. We start playing baseball with the little kids. And we go
by little
there.
kids, you mean 6, 7, 8?
No, they're older, 8 or 9. This goes on for a couple of weeks, and then who shows up? Their older brothers. Hey, we want to play baseball. Can we get some gloves? Well, now we're into 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And we start with them. They all have parents. Oh, we'd like to meet your parents. Well, come and meet my parents. We go with the kids and meet the parents. All of a sudden, we have an identity. And our job was to gradually work our way into the community, trying to get older and older people, which we did, 14-year-olds, and the older brother, 17, 18-year-olds, showed up, and we had a baseball team there. And then a lot of it is, it's not what you do, it's the process of doing it. And so how do you suggest, cajole, without telling, without directing, how do you get them to voice what they want to do, living their entire life, never having anybody to say that to, and it wouldn't matter anyway because you saw the map, they didn't live there. As far as the government is concerned, they're invisible. How do you inject them, help them become visible to the downtown? Let's put the map back up if we can. They formed a club. Club Recreativo El Aljibe. It's a recreation club of El Aljibe, which was the name of the barrio. And it was a structure. It met in our house. We were the club.
How long did it take?
Well, we're back. We're in April, May of 64 now.
And you're just trying to position yourself to find out, to connect with the community, to find out what they need, what you might do to help.
Now, I can see what they need. They need water, they need electricity, they need all the things that you and I enjoy, right? That's a heavy lift. So we're thinking we get, and then finally some adults show up. Anyway, it's a club. What do you want to do with this club? And they said, here's what we want to do. We want to put numbers on the houses and street names on the street. What? What do you want to do that for? So we can get mail. If you're in a map where you don't exist, and you don't have a street, and you don't have a number in your house, and there's no phone in your house, and there's maybe one phone in the area, and you have family, you can't get mail. Never occurred to me. I never thought of it. But that was their need. And how do you do that? The city should put names on streets. That's their job, and numbers on the houses. So we had to get a city buy-in, and we led a delegation down to the mayor's office. Do we have an appointment? No, we just walked in. The mayor, lots of people are there asking for stuff. Very patronistic kind of thing. You go to the mayor, you go to some official, and you ask for stuff. We walk in, and all of a sudden, there's two white Americans in the lobby. The mayor, I better see what these guys are up to. And we walk with our delegation. And we rehearsed it before going down, and yada, yada, yada. And they say, we want numbers in the houses and names in the street. Whoa, no one's ever asked for that before. They do it. They come out and they put names in the street. And you go to Google Earth, you go down, there's now a Calle Street, Cuerpo de Paz. There's a Peace Corps Street now up where it says Las Canitas. Hey, they feel pretty good about it. What's next? We want to change the name of the barrio. It's El Jibe. Trujillo put that name on, and we don't like it. Okay? They picked the name, Simón Bolívar, went back to the mayor's office. Now the mayor knew him. Uh-oh, here are these guys back from the street. You want the name? Okay, we'll give you a name. What name do you want? You want that name? He didn't care what it was called. And they had a name. They had dug a sign, dug a hole, put a sign up. And Donald Reed Cabral and the mayor, who was president of the country, and the mayor came out for the inauguration of this new barrio. All of a sudden, they were noticed. And in a sense, we were sort of on the way. They were learning how to get things done. A lot of it was local cooperation. They went down and said, we'd like to get the streets paved. You saw the streets. We don't like the dust in the summer and the mud in the rainy season. Back down to the mayor. Out come the graders, and they put down, it's not permanent, they put down something that lasts about 6 months. Big improvement. I'm going to stop. Any questions up to this point? Thoughts,
I have
comments?
an observation.
Yes?
What you're talking about, I think, in terms of the criteria that we've been talking about as guiding principles for Sarge, what you're talking about is that without being obtrusive or dictatorial, you had a lot of empathetic compassion for these people, and through your service, you empowered them.
Yeah. That's what the Peace Corps, yeah, that's right. Yes, that's correct.
Sort of along those lines, initially when you started the story, I was surprised that there were so little guidelines to the initiative, but was that sort of the objective for you guys to go in there in, like you said, a non-obtrusive way and sort of be a backbone for the community as opposed to the entire process itself? The ideal is not to have the community rely on you, Right.
but to sort of be a suggestion a maneuver. Jose, me, Pedro, you guys want to come to the mayor's office? Who's coming out of the mayor's office? And so it's not sort of we're going to do this. It has to come from them. And we had one meeting, they wanted to elect officers of the club. And we thought, great, democracy, elections. This is really cool. You have nominations and you vote, and there's a second. No. None of that.
And you have to understand also that no urban community action program, and that was the characteristic of the Latin American programs, because, at that time, cities as we know them were not characteristic in Africa or the Middle East, with some exceptions. Of course, Calcutta is an exception, for example, but no community action program is ever the same. They're all different because the volunteers do really try to understand the situation in which they are living and to enable the people who are living there to decide what, in fact, they want to change, and to enable them to figure out how to change it. As Kirby describes, go down and see the mayor. Well, none of them had ever gone to see the mayor. They never would have even thought about seeing the mayor. But that's something that we understand, and that we are able to make them believe that it can happen.
And of course, before they went to see the mayor, they had to figure out what they wanted to go to see the mayor about.
Well, Kirby says they rehearsed.
Well, no, I know, but I mean, even before that, Kirby was positioned by Coach, to your point, he was positioned to find out what the problem was that they needed to solve, and then you begin to go see the mayors. Yes.
Oh, well, see, you can go.
In those meetings with the mayor, who spoke? Who usually led?
They did. We may have introduced ourselves, but they did all the speaking. And we're very good at it.
And who was the they? Was it adults or the kids? Or?
Adults and maybe, I can't remember all the meetings, but maybe some of the 18, 19-year-olds. It took a while to get parents involved, and not many at the end became involved. This became an operation of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who played on the baseball team, and later will come to what their second role was later in the year. But their answer to democracy and voting is, we know who the leaders are. Jose, Pedro, Papabuelo, there was consensus. And we fought it. No, you can't do that, and realized, don't fight this. It's their thing. That's not a fight you want to pick. We're not to 65 yet. We're down gradually the club got bigger and bigger. They had fundraisers and dances, and we got movies from the Peace Corps office, and had movie nights. And then 2 Peace Corps young women moved out just outside the barrio. They were just transitioning from someplace else. And could they help? And I didn't find out till 50 years later how important that was. Because up to that time, the girls of the barrio, the 18, 19-year-old girls, were not allowed by their parents to go to the house where the guys were gathering at this American's house. But as soon as there was a female volunteer, the girls came. It was safe. And Kay, she did a great job. So then there were different things started. All of a sudden they began talking about a medical dispensary. There's no hospital, there's no nothing. There is down the road, but so that was a female girls project, and Kay took it and ran and got Amantina and Tati involved, and they got they found a vacant place. They got some bandages from here, there, and the other place. I don't know where. They got a doctor to come once a week, and they've had once a week meetings at this clinic. So that was another project. About little afterwards, the final project was we were contacted, a rich guy. We became friends with a rich guy, a rich importer. Downtown.
How did you meet them?
Huh?
How did you meet the wealthy?
I don't know how I met him, but I did. Joe met him first, and then I met him, and I don't know, but he lives. He lives.
Where were you guys?
Well, there's just Las Canitas is where we were living. This guy, go to number 12 down there. That's where the rich guy lived, down in that area of town. And we became friends with him. He would give us R&R. He'd take us out for dinners, for lunches. We took a shower at his place. We had no water either, unless you wanted to get up at 3 in the morning for a cold shower, which wasn't always the nicest thing to do in your latrine, swatting away the cockroaches. And then we said, Max, if you want to see us, you have to come out to where we are. Well, he'd never done that. So he came out, and he began meeting people in the club. And he was a pretty cool guy. And they liked him, and he liked them. He didn't give them anything. They didn't ask for anything. He just became a friend. He's very active in the Catholic Church. He found out that the Catholic Church wanted to build a school in a barrio. And Max said, Simon Bolivar. Because I know the Peace Corps there, and they got this club there, and I've been out there, and we met with the Hermanos de la Salle, and we're going to build a school, and we got an agreement from them that the labor would come from the community. People will get jobs, they'd build a school, they'd provide the teachers, and they built a school. And the ending of that story will come at about 2 o'clock when we're closing up, because I want to tell you the ending to that school. So here we are now around 65. We're in the early part of 65. I've taken a vacation, and Joe's taken a vacation. We got this club going. We're sort of hot stuff, we think. It's going all right. We've been through, with the Peace Corps tells you in training, our culture shock dips. They chart exactly what happens, and they were spot on. That you're enthusiastic in this, and then you get, oh my God, I can't take a shower, I can't drink any water. If I eat another thing of sardines, I'm going to go crazy. And you realize that goat meat is a luxury, and you're just tired of living there, and you're tired of the Dominicans. You get pissed off at the Dominicans, and all of a sudden that begins. But that happens about the 4th month, by the way. 5th month, then it begins to turn up, right? And then you're okay. Then a little bit later, you dip again. Not as deep, not as long, but then, you recognize this, and this is where the staff steps in and says, hey, you got to take a couple days off. You're going through this culture shock thing. Come on down. I'll invite you to the house for dinner. We'll take a shower, and you get an injection of a life a little bit, and you come out. So we're in, am I doing okay? So I keep going?
Yeah.
We're in March, April 65. It is drier than hell. We haven't had rain for weeks, maybe months. And when you don't have rain, right at that V there, where the entrance to the barrio is, there's a spigot, one spigot. And there's a line of women, as their job is to cart water in tin vats balanced on their head. They are really good at it. But these things weigh a lot. And when there's no rain, there's no water pressure. And so if there's a faucet here, there, in the other place, down in that doesn't work. And people are pissed off. They're tense. It's a bad time. By that time, I've gotten another job. Because when I was at college, I worked in the TV station in college to earn some money. And they were starting up educational television. So I would go to work there at Radio Santo Domingo, which is their main radio and television station. That is number 7 up there. And I would take 2 mini buses to get there. And the characteristic of these mini buses, they're really cars. You jump in and they go through a route and they pack people in. And the old cars had metal dashboards.
Running boards.
Dashboards. And you get in, you give the guy, you say, I'm going this far, you give the guy a dime, whatever it is, and he tosses the money up on the dashboard. Well, if it's metal, it flies all over the place. So, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you the story shortly. So, he puts a cloth down because the money will stick. And it's a red cloth. They all use these same red cloths just to... Anyway, I go to my job on Saturday morning to Radio Santo Domingo. I walk in, and we're doing a public health TV program. A Peace Corps nurse is doing the sort of the blah blah. Because I'm such an expert from 4 years at Chapel Hill Station. And we have a Dominican director named Manolo Quiros. And instead of going upstairs, he's at the front door. This is Saturday, April 24th. And he says, Kirby, there's no program today. Why? I don't know. I think the equipment's broken. Or the electricity's out, but there's no point. Here, I'll take you in my car and I'll drop you off where you can get a Publico, these little taxi things I'm talking about, and you can go home. So he takes me and I go back to the barrio. And on that afternoon, you turn on the radio, and the first thing that was attacked by the rebels was Radio Santo Domingo. And I found out later that he was the inside rebel coordinating the inside activity, and his job makes sure that American doesn't come here on Saturday morning. We don't want an American trapped in Radio Santo Domingo. Then on the 24th and 25th begins the revolution.
Let me just give you a little quick...
I'm going to say one other thing, just to get orientation. My coat is trapped here. I can't get it up. I'm up at Las Canitas. At number 6, there's a volunteer living there, Rob Gutowski, under the bridge. Go to where it says La Caridad, that's where the girls lived. Villa Maya, sort of, not exactly true, is where 2 more volunteers lived. There were several, there was a blind volunteer, Gear Wilcox. There was a Harry Karamitas who worked at the leprosy sanatorium. They lived down around 10, south of 10, around there. So not all the volunteers lived in the north, and they were spread out all over the city. The Peace Corps office was down, see where it says 15?
It's going to help with the code.
No, thank you. Where it says 15, and right next to it is a sort of a oval, and there's a street. That's the Hotel Jaragua, and we are across the street, the Peace Corps office. The embassy, the U.S. Embassy is number 2. The Presidential Palace is number 3. That was the second thing attacked that day, and there's a rumor there was a tunnel between 2 and 3. Also important to know is look out way on the left, you see 21 and 1. That's a Hotel Embajador. Becomes the staging area, and you all have seen that hotel. And I'll tell you where. In Godfather 2, Al Pacino goes to, quote, Havana. It's and has a meeting with Meyer Lansky. It's held at the Hotel Embajador. And you will see Al Pacino driving up, and a very tall man in a green uniform is the doorman. He's was the actual doorman of the Hotel Embajador. So you have seen that hotel without really knowing. So that's sort of you can see the distances from where I am to the hotel in Bajador is a good hour. Long time. So that's about what it is. Sorry.
Good. No. Well, all I was going to say was that the revolution takes place over the next 3 weeks to a month, and there's a lot that goes on. But and a lot of it has to do with Kirby, and a lot of it has to do with what Bill and the Peace Corps office are doing. But there's some internal politics that are happening. It's on your sheet there on the 22nd, which is a couple of days before the fighting happens. There are a couple of internal things that I think are worth knowing. President Reed Cabral gets wind of the fact that there is a coup underway, and he dismisses 7 Air Force officers. They decide that we better move now. They were planning on having the coup apparently in July, and the idea was to bring Juan Bosch out of exile. But they move ahead with the revolution, and they take over 2 of the military bases. President Cabral orders the other military to attack them and bring them under control. They refuse. This is Wassini Wassim. He's now Brigadier General. He's the guy who dumped Bosch, and they apparently have a backdoor deal saying, all right, we're going to get rid of Cabral, we're going to establish another junta, and we'll have elections in the fall. And for a while, the junior officers who are revolting think, okay, but then they change their mind. They don't trust these guys. They don't trust Wassini Wassim. And they unilaterally call for the return of Juan Bosch, who's in Puerto Rico. How far is Puerto Rico? Not far. Not far. And then they install, as it says there, second last line, Jose Ureña as the provisional president. He was constitutionally the only guy in town who was the next in line. The president, the vice president, and the president of the Senate were all in exile. He was the president of the House of Deputies of the government, and so he was a legitimate successor according to the Constitution that they want to restore. They do that. Wassini Wassim hears about it, feels betrayed, and takes to the air. He runs the Air Force. And his planes then strafe the presidential palace where Ureña is staying. And the civil war really begins between the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries.
As with every revolution, the Cuban Revolution, this revolution, you take in any particular order, you depose the guy you want to depose. You get the means of communication in your hands, and you get the guns. And the means of communication all were number 7 at Radio Santo Domingo. Television and radio, nationally, locally. There was, I think it's number, not 10, it's somewhere up there, around 10, I think, is the National Police Station with tremendous number of guns. The Cascos Blancos, the white hats, hated. They were the shock troops of the police force. The rebels stormed, or the army, whoever was, stormed that, and they got the guns. At that point, you could hear the radio back and forth. It was the rebels, it was not the rebels. The rebels asked people to go to the bridge. Why the bridge? Wesson E. Wesson, his base was on the right-hand side. There were 2 airports, the Air Force and the commercial. That bridge is the only bridge from that side into the city. Calls of people, go to the bridge. It was like the movie Bridges of Toko-Ri. The planes, 10 or 12 planes in the air, dive bombing the bridge and shooting. This is now Sunday. In Monday, it really gets heavy. The rebels are really doing well. They attacked that police station. They got the guns. Camaño is down at 13 down there. Way down here, his troops are in the north. All that area is all rebel-held area because the baseball team that I played on, Buyo and Victor, who I played on every week, they were next seen with the gun patrolling the streets. Friends and neighbors became rebels. And they, what day is it? The police station here. On the 28th, about a block and a half from where I was the local police station. And what do? You go after the guns. That's where the guns are locally. Buyo and those guys got a group together, stormed the police station. The police left, ran, because they were going to get killed. This wasn't a revolution in the movies. They were shooting people, and kids were shooting people, and there were bodies in the street, and it was serious business. The police, I think there were 4 of them, fled and hid in the house next 2 doors down from the police, under the beds. This is the police station attacked during the day. At the house of Tati, the girl I mentioned before, who led the medical dispensary. Her father had been a cop. I went down to their house and sat outside the porch thinking rebels were unlikely to shoot an American. Wasn't totally right there. So I'm going to stay here because if they find the police in there, the whole family's dead, everybody's dead. So I sat there for about 4 or 5 hours, then night came, police changed their clothes, went out the back, and escaped. But it was, you're hiding behind lampposts, and all of a sudden people are patrolling.
Here's a and then we'll get to what was going on in Washington too for a second. But Kirby wrote a very detailed kind of timeline of what was going on for him and what he was thinking in a diary, which is now which has been uploaded into the Dropbox, so you can go look at that and read that. This is an excerpt from the 26th, so the day after the shooting started, and he said so you can tell us what this is, but there's a part of it that's very interesting to me. Just talked to Joe, who left for BJ's. Rob lives near 2 big tanks of gasoline. It was getting just a bit too hot. The girls are leaving. A plane shot fairly near their house, and someone threw a bomb and killed a man across the street. Bob Satin is coming to get them out, as well as the nurses. A helicopter flew near the bridge and was fired on there, as from the barrio. I don't want to, and then you have parenthetically, I don't want to leave as my place is with the people here. I'm not going of my own volition, only if ordered. An uncle of Rigo's has been reported killed, and they're crying like mad in his house. And there's this very fascinating narration of the violence that's going around you, how it's impacting the Peace Corps volunteers, I guess, who are there. And then there's this parenthetical insert which says, I don't want to leave as my place is with the people here. I'm not going of my own volition, only as ordered. What was going on with that?
It gets back to why the genesis of the Peace Corps. Your part of it is not just the job you do, but it's the establishment of a life with these people and sharing that life. And so it got to a point at in April when they were under threat. My friends were under threat. Some of them were dying, or could die, and did die. And I definitely didn't want to be evacuated. I mean, I don't think that was ever proposed, but I didn't want to leave. I felt safer there than any place else because there was so much shooting everywhere. I knew the people where I lived, and I knew I could be protected and find a place to hide if I had to. And I was mostly right. Because then word came, I think, to the Peace Corps office that the fighting was going to increase. The Marines, the 82nd Airborne had landed. Time to get out, so go to the nearest hospital where you'll be safe. question was, how do you get to the hospital? And meanwhile, the Marines and Army had landed, and see that big black stripe right down across the Duarte Bridge, number 6, it goes all the way down, Botanical Gardens down, and around the 21 and 1, right? The U.S. Marines came in, and that's their security zone. So what it does is, where's Camanio 13? Where his troops to the north? Camanio can't get to his troops. The troops can't get to him. They can't defend it. The U.S. came in and stopped the revolution. We're being neutral, right? But by the fact of landing at Weston E. Wesson's Air Base, they were immediately identified with him, as properly so. They came in across the Duarte Bridge, and it was an explosion of 82nd Airborne and Marines.
What was happening back?
Well, first you have to understand that Jack Vaughan, who had been recruited from ICA in 1961 when he was the ICA mission director in Senegal, Dakar, became head of the Peace Corps' Latin American program. And as I said before, he really was the impetus for the urban community action programs of which Kirby's in the Dominican Republic was a prototype. Jack was extremely conservative guy, actually had been a professional boxer at one point in his career, and he was a very sympathetic sort of personality. Johnson recruited Jack to run the Latin American part of the State Department. That is to say, Jack became Assistant Secretary for Latin American Affairs. And somewhat to the Peace Corps' surprise, Jack turned out to be a reactionary counter-revolutionary. Jack regarded himself, as he told me himself, as Johnson's point man for this intervention in the Dominican Republic, which I emphasize, as I have tried to do several times in the course of this workshop, because rightly or wrongly, Johnson felt that what Kirby calls the rebels, I call the people, were communists, or were inspired by communists. And this story gets out, nobody's quite sure how the story gets out, but the story gets out, well, but there are 54 communists, you know, in this revolution. Well, but you think about that for a second, right? There are 2 or 3 million Dominicans,
Something like that.
right? And there are 110 Peace Corps volunteers, 108, 109, 110 Peace Corps volunteers, and 54 communists. That's really a threat. But, you know,
There was a lot of talk down there about his Castro involvement.
between Johnson and Secretary Rusk and Jack Vaughan, he bragged, actually, ashamed to say. He would talk about Wessine Wissine, but not use his real name. He would describe him as Smith A. Wessine, and if any of you understand anything about handguns, you might know that the Smith & Wesson was then the revolver of choice in law enforcement around the world. For the Peace Corps, whether it was the staff in Washington or the volunteers in the Dominican Republic, with the exception of one of the Peace Corps country directors there, this was appalling. And that's why we call this particular workshop the Peace Corps and the War Corps, because you can see that there was a War Corps and there was a Peace Corps, and I think it's very important, Kirby, for you to explain how, notwithstanding the war corps, the Peace Corps stayed together, survived, suffered no injuries, went back and forth between the rebel lines and the United States forces untouched. The nurses worked 24 hours, 7 in the hospitals. It's an incredible story of the Peace Corps actually doing what we had always thought it would do. That is to say, maintain its service and compassion presence even under the most difficult circumstances that any Peace Corps volunteers had ever encountered.
First thing was the hospital, right?
Yeah. The idea that Peace Corps was really threatened because all our work we're doing, we're with the people, we're with you, we're alongside you. In comes the 82nd Airborne, 20,000, 25,000 troops, more troops in San Domingo than we had in Vietnam at the time. In our case, the leaders of the baseball team and the club were walking the streets with guns. Their minds were not on how are we going to fix the roads or what number is my house. They were in their revolution. And so we could not take part in the fighting, obviously. That was not our shtick. We were asked. But everybody declined. The question was, how in what guise would the Peace Corps survive if it did that onslaught of political animosity towards the United States? Because we were the United States Peace Corps. Yes and no. And there was more than once, that's the Americans, that's not you, you're the Peace Corps. We began to discover a delineation between the U.S., that's a Peace Corps volunteer. And the person, the Dominican saying that would not connect the dots. The communism, go back to my taxi with a red cloth. John Bartlow Martin, who I think is to blame for this, he comes down as Johnson's special representative and is on the phone in the embassy, lobby of the embassy. Remember, no cell phones, no secure phones. The big telephone company is down in the rebel-held area, and they recorded every telephone call made to or from the U.S. Embassy. And John Butler Martin made a call, Mr. President, I know this is a communist revolution because all the cab drivers had red cloths in their window. And anyway, we were sent to the hospital.
Pause a second.
Yeah.
Everybody's smiling, but this is serious business. Martin really believed that.
Yeah, he did.
He believed that.
And nobody was curious enough to doubt it or to say, is it so?
Right. Kay and I are up where it says Las Canitas. And so we're told to get out, go to the nearest hospital. The nearest hospital, which is not on that map, if you take that V there and you come to the left, and it intersects that double road. There's a line. It's right at that corner is the nearest hospital, which is about, I'd say, 1.5 miles, almost 2 miles. How to get there? There's shooting going on all over the place. Tires are burning in the streets. Bodies are in their streets. You don't just walk down the street unless you want to commit suicide. So we come up with a brilliant idea. We disguise ourselves as doctors. How do you do that? I have the foggiest idea. We took the Peace Corps medical kit and found some red tape or ink or made a red cross, and we put some gown on or something. Anyway, we tried to look like doctors, medical people, traipsing off to the hospital. And we walked, and we made it. Do you want to?
I want to read a quotation from your diary, which is on 4/29. You got there on the 28th or 29th, but this is what is hell? This is the opening of the entry. Hell is a 10-year-old kid with his brains hanging out. Hell is a man slowly bleeding to death while his guts are blown apart. Hell is 14-year-old kids carrying machine guns. Hell is war. This is hell. Moscoso Puello, Dominican Republic.
The scene at this hospital was, you can't imagine it. No water, no electricity in a hospital. No generator, no nothing. Rivers of blood. Bodies, 10, 12 bodies at a time brought in. And the Peace Corps nurses, there were 4 or 5 of them there doing everything. Some of the Dominican doctors just left. Get me out of here. Peace Corps nurses either were stationed there as a regular job or were recruited from other places to work there. And there were about, for the first day, 4 or 5 of us non-medical types, 2 left, 3 or 4 left. I think there were 2 of us left. And there were no, so how do you do operations? By flashlight. How do you find the bullets? You put the flashlight inside the person's body until the doctor finds the bullet. And it gets worse from there. So it was a very, very bad scene, but the only, not the only people working there were us, but the Dominicans weren't, the staff and weren't on top of their game, put it that way. But the people in the Peace Corps finally we got a generator. And I am the most unqualified mechanical person you could possibly think of. I know nothing about anything. And I got this generator and they said, fix this generator, get this generator started so we can have lights. And I don't know how it happened, but we got the generator going so it could light one light in the operating room so they could do operations with light. The generator unfortunately was outside, and to go outside, it was, you were glad when you got back inside because they were shooting outside.
Bill.
What was it in you that, made you, allowed you to stay in that, to be there? How did that grow? How was that inside you? How did you have those kinds of values and that sort of commitment?
That question assumes that I thought about that a lot. I don't know. It was you had to survive, and there was work to be done, and this body needs to be carried here, and no one's around. Carry it.
But other, all the other Americans were evacuated. Even the Dominicans weren't staying in the hospital. Yet, 5 Peace Corps nurses and the other Peace Corps volunteers in the area.
And the others became involved later.
So there's something about the way you were there. Do you think? Were you guys? You have said to me that you don't think Kirby Jones per se is so. I think you're pretty special, but you have said.
No, we were all ordinary people in an extraordinary situation, right. And there are 200,000 ex-Peace Corps volunteers. I think it could have happened anywhere.
And in fact, elsewhere. For example, very early on in the history of the Peace Corps, Indonesia tried to occupy what is now called Sabah, which was then a British colony known as North Borneo. And there were two Peace Corps volunteers, Mimi and Tom Kyer, who were stationed in a village right on the border between Sabah, North Borneo, and Indonesia on the island of Borneo. And their village didn't want to be incorporated into Indonesia. And the village armed itself, and Mimi and Tom were no exception. And they fought off this Indonesian incursion without giving it a moment's thought. And might I suggest, Kirby, you would reject this, of course, but your fellow volunteers, none of whom were evacuated, all of whom resisted evacuation, could it be that you were motivated by your ideals of service and your compassion for what was going on? Could it be?
Yeah. I mean, it's a combination of, we've now, or I'll talk about me. I had lived with in this community for 15 months. Tough living, to be honest. But we all shared that. I played on the baseball team. I knew I had coffee and I don't know how many back patios. I really liked these people. Really liked it. I love the kids. I just really loved them. And that was my community. And the thought of leaving them, it was
But isn't it
awful.
also fair to say that they liked you?
Yes. And service, you did your job. And there's a job to be done. And so you just sort of did it. And you did it because you really cared about these people. And I think that's somehow that came across to the Dominicans and to the rebels. Kaman Yu announced, he was the leader of the rebels. He announced on the radio the only Americans allowed in his area of control were the Peace Corps volunteers. And we wrote Cuerpo de Paz, Peace Corps, on the side of trucks. And to go from the south to the north or vice versa, you had to go through rebel checkpoints, Dominican military checkpoints, U.S. Army checkpoints. Peace Corps went sailing through. And so, not sailing, but we went through, allowed by everybody without any question.
How were you received by the U.S. forces in the Dominican Republic, knowing that they knew you were with the people or the rebels?
We're coming to that in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
The final comment of that is, it's somewhere, probably my diary is more eloquent than I am. You better find it and read it.
What? About universal acceptance?
Yeah.
I mean,
I was proud to be a Peace Corps volunteer. Damn proud.
and here's what you wrote. I have seen such a universal acceptance of Peace Corps by the people. I would have never believed it. Many rebels have told me that Peace Corps is now needed more than ever. This is on the 10th of May. This is written. Peace Corps trucks are led through rebel checkpoints and generally welcomed by all. If nothing else, this has given me such pride and honor to be a part of such an organization. It would truly be a shame to have to leave. And you stayed in the hospital for 5 days. Is that right?
Yes.
And then that was enough. But the nurses, the Peace Corps nurses,
Stayed on they had a revolving R&R, essentially.
and then
But the rest of the volunteers, the non-nurses, were sent downtown to number 16. We went to the Hotel Embajador, then to number 16, which was Colegio Santo Domingo, which the nuns occupied, but they left very early and handed a Peace Corps staff member the keys and said, please protect our place. And so we all moved in. And then...
yeah, you didn't just stop.
Then it was, now what are we going to do? And we landed on food distribution. That, up where you see 8, that VMA bridge, that's the only source of food. That's the road that goes to the north of the country, where the the produce comes in. The Dominican military closed that road right away. There wasn't any food. There was no food for weeks. These are no food for people who buy what they eat every day, every day. There's no freezers. There's no storage of food. There's no cooling. There's no nothing. You buy it, you eat it, and you do the same thing the next day. There was no food. So we went down, and there's a long story, I'll make it very short. We went down, essentially borrowed food from AID and CARE, loaded up some trucks, and we drove it out to my barrio. Through all the checkpoints, Cuerpo de Paz, through those checkpoints of the street, out there, and the first food distribution was a failure. Bags of rice, bags of beans, we offloaded it, all of a sudden word got around, there was food coming off, and a riot. Crowds of people, hundreds of people, and it was us, get out of Dodge before something happens. So we drive off, and I think push the food off, and it not done very well. I went back the next day to the rebel command post in the barrio, and I said, we want to do this again. You guys have to set this up. Organize people. You got the guns, now use them and get people organized. And they said, we'll do it, and we went back the next day, and they had everybody lined up. The guns were there. They were there. We had a very orderly food distribution thing, and that worked out very well. It was a lot of food. Then Manolo Quiroz, my friend at Radio San Domingo, asked me, said, can you get food to us there too? We got people in there I haven't eaten in days. We never could. But then it was...
Shot at on the way back, right?
Yeah, then coming back down that road, take that road again back to the hospital, that one road, Nicolas de Ovando it's called, and we're up there and we're driving, three of us in the truck in the front, and we look up and there's a U.S. military Jeep coming the other way. Look how far into rebel-held territory that Jeep was. That's a long way. And by the time we said, what the hell are these people doing here? 2 machine guns open up fire from across the street, not at us, but we happened to be there with the other Jeep. And so the initial reaction was I was driving, was to put on the brake and stop, and then I realized that I didn't know where I was going, and I took a foot off the brake on the accelerator and just got out of town. And it was... It is amazing that nobody was killed. B.J. Warren, a staff member, to get people out. There were some volunteers in the lower right-hand part of the city. She had to drive in, keep the car going, and the volunteer to run out, jump in the open car, and off they went before the bullets came. So there were some real acts of heroism. And anyway.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we have 20 minutes, and we need to get to a little bit. Oh, sorry, yeah.
How invaluable was it for you to know that the Peace Corps was separated from being part of the United States, that was coming in military, U.S. military, coming into San Domingo? How invaluable was that for you as being part of Peace Corps?
Well, the difference became evident to us. I mean, I didn't really think, I don't think I thought about it. I just knew the troops were coming. And then from the Dominicans came expressions of the Peace Corps is different and separate and is immune from this anti-American feeling. And in fact, when we were living downtown, some rebels from a neighboring barrio came over to let's see what's in the Americans' house. And Buyo and Victor, who had attacked the police station, patrolling the streets, stopped the rebels and say, no, you can't get in there. That's the Peace Corps house. And so our rebels, my guys, kept the other guys out. And, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The leap we need to make isn't so much in time, but in subject. All this was happening to Kirby while the politics of the situation was unfolding. The Juan Bosch, who was still in Puerto Rico, resigned, as it were, abdicated or resigned as president, and the Congress in exile appointed the rebel commander Camaño as the president. This was on the 4th. So he set up a government, and the I think that's right, on the 4th, yeah.
A meaningless government.
A meaningless government, but nevertheless, he was trying to represent the people, as Bill said, and then the U.S. established its own leader. The U.S. came in. By this time, they had 30,000 troops.
What had happened, there was a stalemate. And a stalemate for rebels is disaster. The U.S. had cut them off. The U.S. was letting Dominican military and Dominican tanks go through their neutrality zone into the northern part of the city. The Dominican military went from west to east, cleaning up. Tanks, personnel carriers, guns, whatever.
All supplied by the United States.
Also, yeah. Meanwhile, Camaño is down here, totally isolated. That is getting smaller and smaller. It's essentially over in terms of the revolution. In terms of they had no way of succeeding once Operation Limpieza, which is the cleaning operation, took place across the north. We became ticked off at all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Dominican military going through the neutrality zone and then came downtown and heard Americans, spokesmen say, no, we're not doing that. It was a big political awakening for me. I mean, it was a real education, hearing my government lie like that. So the Peace Corps offered us early termination. Anybody wanted to leave early was welcome to leave, and wanted to stay, you're welcome to stay. And every group had a termination conference, and that was held in Puerto Rico. We got to Puerto Rico. They sent down their hotshot shrinks. Joe English, head of the shrinks in the Peace Corps in Washington. Joe Coleman, head of research, and the top guns came down to look at us and see what are these guys like? Who are they? And three of us got together. Dick Bourne, Skip Andrews, and I got together and wrote a letter. And in our 22-year-old,
which you have in your
humility, we wrote a letter to the president saying, here's what we disagree with, and by the way, if we don't hear from you in 24 hours, we're going to have a press conference. So take that, Mr. President. The letter arrived, copies to Shriver and to Moyers, who was Johnson's press secretary, had been number 2. Shriver's out of town. The letter goes to Frank Mankiewicz, head of Latin America. He goes to see Moyers. Moyers says, get over here, I got to talk to you. And Moyers says to Frank, he said, Lyndon Johnson is so pissed off at these volunteers. If I show him this letter, they're out. He's going to pull them all out. I can't show him this letter. Mankiewicz, get down there and stop this press conference. Mankiewicz comes down to Puerto Rico that night, walks in and says something to the effect of, the White House has received your letter, and if the objective of your letter was to communicate to the President of the United States how you feel, I can tell you right now your letter has been totally successful. We heard, oh, he's seen the letter. Mankiewicz was telling us, not that he'd seen the letter, he never said that. He knew our feelings. Johnson did know our feelings. And Frank said, I wouldn't hold a press conference because I think the Peace Corps will be pulled out if you do, and it may affect Peace Corps in various other countries. But you guys make the decision and walked out of the room, leaving us. And Skip wanted to hold the press conference. I think the rest of us did not because we didn't want to leave. And so we did not hold the press conference. And maybe I'm rushing ahead too much. We came back. It was basically over. We're now in June. It's not, they're still fighting, a little bit of fighting, pockets here and there, this and that, and the nurses. But it was essentially over. It was time to figure out a way, how are we going to get back to work? Was it resurrectable? All the medical dispensary, the school, the baseball teams, the club, was that resurrectable given everything that has happened? And the answer was yes. And I'm going to conclude. Can I conclude with this one thing I haven't told you about? I went back in 2012. Yes, sir.
Do you think the letter that was published would have made a difference?
No. By that time, it was done. The U.S. had come in. They weren't neutral. The Dominican military had done its thing. Camaño, the rebels were finished. It was over.
And Bill, from your perspective,
Well, you have in your materials the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearings that were held exactly proximate to these events. This is probably the last set of Peace Corps authorization hearings that Sarge and I actually did together. He, at this time, is also the director of the War Against Poverty. And if you read the hearings, you will see that the representatives, Republican and Democratic alike, are very concerned about how can you do two jobs and what is going to happen to the Peace Corps that we love if your attention is so distracted by the war against poverty and by the politics of the war against poverty. At the same time, if you read the hearings, you will see that with respect to the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, the hearings were a love feast. The volunteers were regarded, rightly so, as heroes and heroines. Sarge talks expansively about how, for example, Roberta Warren, whom Kirby has just described and who unfortunately just died a couple of months ago, how BJ went back and forth repeatedly without any question and without any harm. He describes the nurses working 24/7 in the hospital. And what is probably most important is that ultimately even Wassine and Wassine welcomes the fact that the Peace Corps stayed and the Peace Corps volunteer program in the Dominican Republic continued. In fact, in the next contingent, unless my memory serves me wrong, was a future senator from Connecticut, Christopher Dodd, Peace Corps volunteer in Dominican Republic 6.
And current Congressman Joe Kennedy III,
And current Congressman Joe
Peace Corps
Kennedy, right.
volunteer, in the Dominican Republic. I want to end with two stories.
I thought I saw a hand, but I couldn't tell whether that was a scratch or a hand.
This, because of the intensity of these few months, the Peace Corps idea worked. What Sarge thought about and Bill put together and all those guys in Washington came up with a pretty good thing. And they trusted 20-somethings to go overseas and not screw up and do and to serve. And it does. And the question is, what they do, does it work? I went back for the 50th reunion of the Peace Corps in 2012. And Tati, who's got the clicker for the picture? If you would put that, keep going, that, keep going. Stop right there. Tati on the left. That was what she looked like then. Kay Deming is a Peace Corps volunteer. I talk about Kay, and Papa Abuelo in the middle was head of the club. I went back with Tati. She broke out of the barrio. Breaking out of the barrio and a social system that strong is not easy to do. Very difficult. What? We're not good enough for you? Why would you want to leave Simon Bolivar? What, you're going to leave your sisters behind? What? She did, and it was tough. She got married, 2 sons, grandchildren now, fantastic family. She took me back to Simon Bolivar. I've been back before, but not exactly like this. First, we went back to her house. That house where they hid the policeman, her older sister still lives in that house. I sat on the same porch I'd sat at 50 years ago drinking coffee with Tati and her 2 sisters. And I said to her, I can't believe we're in the same porch. Right? Then we went to the school. The school is now a 2-story structure, 1,200 kids, and is flourishing. We went and came out of the school, and Tati said, look down there, that's a medical clinic, a 2-story building. Doctors come all the time. That's been going on for 50 years. We're walking around the corner, and there's a Venezuelan flag off in the distance. I ask her, what's that? She says, that's the Venezuelan medical clinic. We learned from you how to get things done, and we got the Venezuelans to put up that clinic. And I'm thinking to myself, that's what it's all about. It's a sliver. But there's been 200,000 volunteers. There's 200,000 slivers around the world. That's a lot of people. And so the Peace Corps worked, I think, on the idea stage, on the macro stage. The idea was accepted, but it can also work on the micro stage, which is all one person can do. Tati and I and BJ and her husband took a trip out to this town during this weekend. And BJ turned to Tati and said, how did you get out of the barrio? How did you break out? And she turned and pointed to me and said, the Peace Corps. And well, I don't know what to say, other than that's pretty cool. I mean, right? And I like that. It was a great present to me to learn that.
I urge you, if you have a moment, to read, as I did this morning on the plane from New York, Shriver's testimony in these hearings, because, it struck me that this was the zenith of the Peace Corps. We have, in 1965, 13,000 volunteers overseas. Congress gave us enough money so that in 1966 we had 15,000 volunteers overseas. If you read what those volunteers are doing, if you see what I can only describe as a Republican-Democratic love feast between the representatives and the Peace Corps staff, if only we could replicate that today, which I think is the whole purpose of what we are trying to do here with you.
Final thought, Bob Hope.
Oh, yeah.
You all know who Bob Hope is, or don't know, right? Famous comedian. He went all around the world entertaining troops. Vietnam, He was support the troops. Korea, anywhere there's American troop, there's Bob Hope. Aren't our guys just the best? Well, Bob Hope came to the Dominican Republic, and he had Les Brown and the Band of Renown. He had Jerry Colonna with the mustache. His gal of the year was Joey Heatherton, and he was to give shows for the troops. And Bob Hope, wonderful national icon, beloved, just all over the place. Bob Hope announced that every American, not just soldier, who wanted to see his show, could see his shows, except Peace Corps volunteers. They were disinvited.
I'd like to make one final comment in the last minute we have.
But
You know,
we went to the shows, right? We got U.S. soldiers to take us into the shows.
so, we talked at the very beginning of these sessions about the context in which President Kennedy delivered the first State of the Union. And you have the first State of the Union that he delivered in your materials, and it is a survey of all the problems, foreign and domestic, that the president confronted as a young president starting out. And as you know, Warren Wiggins, my colleague, took the name of the paper we wrote about the Peace Corps, The Towering Task, from the coda to the inaugural address, where the president talks about the towering tasks that he has enumerated in the course of his speech. And all I can tell you is whether you look overseas or you look domestically, it doesn't matter. Those tasks still tower above us, and that's your job.
We have a question over here.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, Kirby, thank you for sharing your story. It's certainly a very powerful one. I'm wondering, how did your experience in the Peace Corps affect your personal motivations and aspirations for the rest of your life?
In small ways, it made me a genuine, real skeptic of the U.S. government about the things they said about Vietnam, and they've said about Iraq, and they said about it, anything. It just made me very suspicious. Two, I don't know whether you can draw a direct line between what I've done. I did a lot of political campaigning, and then went back and forth to Cuba a lot, and became friends with Fidel, and took Sarge down there one time. He and his wife, which was very interesting. So it affected it maybe in, I wasn't set up, or my genes weren't right for being an accountant for the next 40 years. It was more, what can I do? And look at the risks there. I didn't take care to chart out things on a long-term basis. I just sort of did them as they came along. Having said that, when I now look back, I'm now retired. Tomorrow I'm going to be at my 73-degree porch, right? I look back, and this happened in 2012, which is why, to me, what was said to me was so powerful. And it's sad and gratifying at the same time. That may have been the best thing I ever did. Because where else can I say that I've had such an impact on somebody else's life? Outside of family, of course. I mean, forget kids and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, and I've thought over the years about the Peace Corps. I'm always an ex-Peace Corps volunteer, and absolutely delighted when I go to the reunions in Washington. They have them every 5 years, and there's a parade across Memorial Bridge. You see all these flags of Thailand, Ethiopia, Colombia, Dominican Republic. You go, holy cow, this is really pretty cool. So I'm really appreciative I had the chance to do it.
I have a question. Now I'm directed to Mr. Josephson and as you, Mr. Jones. What do you take away from the Peace Corps? What do you take away from there for yourselves and for others?
How many of you voted in the last midterm election? Super. That's what I take away.
I'll tell you what I take away. It's individually important what you do. And you're not the only one. Because that sliver of activity in that little barrio, in that part of that city that I did, as I said before, 200,000 other volunteers are doing it someplace else. So yes, your sliver is like this, but you're part of, hopefully, you're maybe part of something much bigger, of which you are a valuable component.
You definitely are part of something much bigger, and it's going to be very difficult, I think, for all of us for the next 2 years, if only because, contrary to my experience, some of which I've shared with you in Washington in 1961, 1966, we have a Senate leader, McConnell, whose word is worthless. I don't say that lightly. 3 times, Harry Reid and McConnell made a deal with respect to moving legislation and nominations through the Senate. And 3 times, McConnell broke his promise. And that is why, in fact, the Democrats finally busted the filibuster rule with respect to nominees. And I wouldn't be surprised if McConnell tries to maneuver again to restore that rule for the next 2 years, because that's the kind of person he is. But don't let that discourage you. You have to hold fast to the spirit we've been talking about in these 4 sessions.
And if I may, can we just give them a round of applause, please? And Kirby, thank you so much for coming and sharing your direct personal experience. It was very, very impactful. And along the lines that we've been closing on, we're so excited to give you a chance to make an impact. And as most of you know, we have the Shriver Undergraduate Fellowship that's available, and the applications are due Monday. That's on Chicago Career Connection. Students of all levels, all undergraduates, are eligible to apply.
Please apply.
Please apply. We love it.
Please
We're
apply.
excited. We've seen a lot of the same faces over the past 4 weeks, and we love that. Similarly, if you have friends who weren't able to make this time, all the videos are on the website, and so people are able to watch those, or if you had to come in late every week after a class. And I'm going to tell everyone who missed this session, definitely, they need to watch this because it was just so wonderful. And we were so glad to have Kirby here, as well as our guests and our friends. And what we're going to do now is we're doing a deep dive student session right here. And so if you're interested in staying for that, that would be wonderful. And you're also more than welcome to stay and ask us any questions about the fellowship. So thank you all very much.